Welcome. My name is Brooks Bonner, and I'm the program director at the E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation with the Half Earth Project. And today is another episode in our Places for a Half Earth Future series. And I am super excited to be joined today by Kyle Lybarger of the Native Habitat Project, who is joining me today from his home in Alabama. And we recently got the chance to meet and spend some time at the subject of our talk today is going to be the E.O. Wilson Land Between the Rivers Preserve, which is a newly established preserve in southern Alabama. And so, well, first off, Kyle, thank you for joining me. And maybe you want to just kind of give folks a brief introduction. Those who don't know who you are, or don't know anything about the Native Habitat Project, maybe you can give them a little more background on what you guys do.
Yeah, so my name's Kyle Lybarger. I'm in Morgan County in North Alabama. So my background's forestry. I got a degree in forestry from Alabama A&M, and right out of college, I guess while I was at A&M, I was working for the State Fish and Wildlife, and so I got 3 years of great experience there, doing a lot of prescribed burns, and then I spent 5 years working as a private forester, and so I was driving around every day trying to find tracts of timber to cut, and I ended up doing it, I guess, in a way that a lot of other timber buyers weren't doing. I was usually trying to help these landowners manage their forest to be the best that they could possibly be. I was kind of doing it the opposite way, where I was leaving white oaks and hickories and creating savannas on a lot of these properties. So I was seeing a lot of cool stuff come back from that, but I was also getting to just see a lot of interesting plants while I was driving back roads all the time. And there was always something new and different to see. It really set me up to learn a lot of plants. And so I was taking photos of them, coming home and trying to identify them, and ended up coming across a lot of rare species. So one species that I found was, well, I found this one remnant in here just less than a mile from my house that had a lot of rare plants.
And when you say remnant, for those of folks maybe not understand what that reference means, maybe you can explain kind of what that is.
So it's like a remnant grassland, like something that has
a holdover, if you will.
Yeah, it's avoided being disked or plowed for the last 250 years. So it's something that is a little piece of what was once here in Alabama, and it has avoided becoming a forest somehow, and it's also avoided becoming a hay field or a crop field. And so I found a remnant down the road from my house, and it had plants that were, grew only like one other place east of the Mississippi. So one of the plant species is also growing here on this remnant down the road from my house here in North Alabama. And I kind of realized how unique this place was. And, I was already used to knocking on landowners' doors. So I knocked on the landowner's door and asked them if I could manage this site for them with prescribed fire. And after introducing fire to it, a lot of native wildflowers started coming back. And now there's a bunch of rare species there. And so we're managing this private land for free.
What was the reaction for a lot of these landowners when you knock on their door and tell them, I want to light your property on fire, basically? I mean, you must have gotten some strange reactions, no?
Well, like maybe only once or twice, honestly. Most of the time, people were really interested in it. I mean, people like to hear they have something unique on their property anyways. Right. Finding out that they have something rare or important on their property, that was usually enough for them to say yes, like, yeah, you can manage it. And so that's what we started doing. And I was just doing this for free on the side because, I was like, well, if I'm not going to manage this property, then nobody is. Like, no organization's driving around trying to find rare plant populations and knocking on landowners' doors saying, hey, you've got the only population of this in the state or whatever. So I started doing that just for free, and it got up to like a dozen properties. And it was about that time where my wife is like, you're going to have to, you have to make a living, and you can't be doing this all the time when you're supposed to be out working as a forester.
Right.
And so I was like, yeah, you're probably right. And so, but we continued to do that. And then.
So that's kind of how the Native Habitat Project
got started. So I started making content about it. And that was like, I remember telling myself, as soon as spring gets here, the first thing flowers, I'm going to make a video, and I'm just going to start making videos about every plant that I come across, because that was the thing, is people didn't know about these places. That's why nobody cared about them. And that's why nobody was protecting them. Is you can't care about something that you don't know about. If you don't know about it, you don't have a reason to care about it.
There's a saying in Spanish. It's like, solo que ama lo que conoce. You only love what you know or what you understand, right?
Yeah, exactly. So anyways, it's come a long way since I started. Used
Yeah.
to just started making videos and I was like, well, the only way to make a difference is to get this information out there to people and show them what's here. Because I used to have the idea that where I lived wasn't unique. You know, we don't have prairie plants here. I have to go out west. There's no rare plants here. This
Right.
is
People don't think of Alabama as a home of savannas or
yeah,
grasslands or prairie, right? They think of the Midwest
but
or they
yeah,
think,
could have
of other
been
places.
couldn't have been more wrong. There's stuff everywhere. And now people message me and they're like, wow, you live in a really unique area. And I'm like, nobody here thinks that, but you got to get out here and you got to get out and see those places. And so that's what I was doing is I was bringing those places to people on social media. And so eventually social media began to like pay for, started making money from it. And, then was able to stop working as a forester and start doing this kind of work every day, seed collecting and, bringing education to folks about these ecosystems. And that's kind of crazy to think back on now, but that's what we're still doing to this day. I'm still managing those same remnants and more that we come across, helping landowners, doing consults every now and then, prescribed burning, a lot of seed collecting, a lot of habitat improvement work, and and anyways, that's the Native Habitat Project.
That's cool. I love it. I think it goes to show that every place on the globe has a unique value and a unique role to play in the variety of ecosystems that we encounter. What we encounter today isn't necessarily how things were, 150, 250, 400 years ago, right?
Mhm.
And that, if you do your homework and if you read a little bit about kind of those areas, you can kind of uncover as you've done what used to be there, how people used to manage it, right? And then
Yeah,
keep an eye out and identify species that are great indicators for what used to be there.
yeah.
And I think it's in terms of in your work, you talked a little bit about kind of how you got started, but I wonder if you could tell us a little about and any of the major challenges that you've had throughout this process of establishing and growing the Native Habitat Project, and then what are some of your main successes or things that you like to share with people things that maybe you're really proud of.
Um, yeah. So as far as challenges, I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, regarding quail. This saying probably is referring to something else, but people always say that quail, the loss of quail is death by a million cuts. And so everything's out to eat a quail. But also, there's a lot of things out there destroying quail habitat. Well, for grasslands, it's no different. It's always like I see a remnant and it never fails. I come back the next day or the next week and it's mowed. And it's like, and that seems to be the biggest, because, in some ways, mowing is what's kept some of these places open and kept them from becoming a forest. But too much mowing will turn it into a non-native monoculture in the long run. And even this week, I'm dealing with that. One of our remnants we've managed for 3 or 4 years at state property at a boat ramp. It's a place that it's the largest population of mowers rosinweed on public lands, and it's got I think it's got one federally endangered species on it, but it's got a lot of just really rare grassland species. And so I consider it a really important site, but the state was letting us manage it, and it started getting mowed. And turns out they didn't take it off their list for their moat and crew, and so it kept getting mowed every year. And we were doing prescribed burns out there, working with the state to do that. Well, and also the sheriff's office was having their crews mow the actual fishing spots where people fish from the banks. And so recently they stopped doing that. They stopped mowing the banks. Well, people started complaining about the Flint Creek not being mowed. And so just this past week, the whole prairie got mowed again. So that's always a challenge. People want to see places mowed, and some people don't really care if there's something rare out there. Even state employees sometimes whose jobs are to protect, and to conserve places.
Right.
And so that seems to be one of the biggest challenges is convincing people, hey, grasslands aren't these tick infested places where you're going to go get bit by a snake. Like that's couldn't be further from the truth. That seems to be the biggest challenge. But one of the biggest wins I think we've had a few years ago, I had the idea. I was like, well, what if we had some artwork done of a plant species and sold some t-shirts with that plant
Oh yeah.
species on the shirt, and we use that to raise money to protect that species. So we're creating awareness for it by putting it on a T-shirt. We're also raising money to protect it, and so that's what we did. We started with a federally endangered species that wasn't being managed at all in the state of Alabama, and we picked a leafy prairie clover. And so
Hmm.
there was 8 populations, and it really depends on how you describe populations, but there's only 2 properties in the state with it on it. One of those properties was a 1,200-acre property, and it was spread across the entire property. So we had these shirts made, and we I think it was like within 3 weeks, we had like $50,000 or something like that. We ended up raising between the leafy prairie clover shirt and other shirts, we raised over $100,000 just from just from shirt sales. And so we went to the 1,200 acres that had 7, 8 populations on it, and that property was for sale. So of course it got in the hands of somebody who was subdividing, the whole 1,200 acres. But we bought 24 acres of it. I had a friend who was looking to buy some properties, very conservation minded. They bought what I think now they have 360 acres next to us, and then another friend of ours who's very conservation minded bought, I think, another 160. And so in all, 6 of the, because there's one, this is what's kind of sad. There's one population left on this property, and it's actually the biggest, but it's landlocked. And so I'm hoping to acquire it in the future. But either way, 6 of the 8 populations of leafy prairie clover in Alabama are now protected.
That's
So
good.
when 2 years prior, none of those
None
were
of them
being
were being
protected
managed or
or
protected.
managed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
now every single one of those 6 populations are being burned, canopies being opened up, removing cedar encroachment, and those populations are now growing and expanding, which to
And
me is
are you seeing other species then also show
oh yeah,
up that wouldn't normally be there because then you've opened up the canopy?
well the place it's incredible the amount of diversity. So one of the populations on a power line we named it the David Webb Glade. It's just solid liatris right now. It's rough blazing star.
Oh yeah. That's a
It's got
beautiful plant.
Nashville breadroot, which is incredible. It's got shooting stars and sunny bells and the list. I mean, it's just Alabama larkspur, just the whole property.
Yeah.
Every population we have is just covered in Alabama larkspur. But we bought 24 acres with the T-shirt sales, and if you stop disturbance, if you stop burning in Alabama, something that's always been open and prairie, and you remove the bison, you remove that large native
Some of
herd
the other controls.
worse, yeah. And within 2 years, 3 years, it's going to be well over your head, starting to become a forest. And so it doesn't take long. We have such long growing seasons here. So bringing back some of those traditional practices of fire, I think, is super important. And I could talk all day about that and just
Yeah.
observations we've made out there and with chinkapin oaks and all the chinkapin oaks dated them at like 200 to 230 years old, and they're all single age, like all the mature oaks are like the same size.
Yeah.
And we've dated that back. Well, that was when Native Americans were removed from here. And so all
Mm.
of a sudden these chinkapin oaks were able to just start growing all at once. And why was that? I think it's because the Native Americans were removed and so were their practices.
I've noticed in a lot of your content that you talk a lot about how either Native Americans use this plant to do this, or they use this to make this, or um, or using fire, right, to manage a landscape for either agriculture or for hunting.
Yeah, I think that's important because a lot of people, humans don't like something unless we can use it for something. Unfortunately,
Or
everybody
there's
was,
some benefit that we gain
yeah,
from it.
we have to have some sort of what good is it? What benefit does it give to me?
Yeah.
Well, people say all the time, prairies don't feed people, forests don't feed people. Well, it pretty much did for tens of thousands of years before Europeans arrived, with a little bit of corn mixed in. But prior to that, Native Americans had their forgotten their forgotten crops, which I think we saw most of.
Mm.
At least we saw a lot of sumpweed
Oh yeah, I remember that. It was very fragrant.
down on the E.O. Wilson Preserve. Whenever the forest opened up into a field, it would be solid sumpweed and it's super fragrant. That was a crop that Native Americans cultivated. Once corn showed up, it was kind of forgotten about. Um, but that sumpweed thrives on disturbance. And what was causing disturbance? Bison and fire. And so it benefited the Native Americans to disturb the landscape, to use fire, because that promoted, well, it promoted new growth, which attracted bison. It promoted better wildlife habitat, which also was another huge food source for them. And it also promoted mass producing trees like oaks and hickories, as well as tons of other native shrubs, plums and hazelnuts and hawthorns and pawpaws, and the list goes on and on. But fire promoted most of those species. And I think when William Bartram traveled through Alabama, he came across a Chickasaw village, and one family alone had 100 bushels of hickory nuts, which is something like 5,600 pounds.
Wow.
In one family, and they were processing those hickory nuts. And so the hickory nut meat was super fatty and oily, but they would dry it in these like balls, and these just be hickory nut meat balls. But they would carry those around, and then they just have to rehydrate those and make like an oatmeal. But
Wow.
they would make oils out of it. Same with acorns; they would have used oak trees as a food source as well. I'm not saying we should get back as humanity; we should get back to that. But if you were the type of person that wanted to have a lower impact on the landscape and didn't want to do traditional agriculture, you can have a forest that was serving a lot of purposes. For one, it's what's supposed to be here, but also if you can feed your family from it too.
Right.
I think that's
Less
pretty cool.
resource intensive, maybe requires less water, but it also is providing a product, also provides habitat, right, for
Yeah.
native species.
Yeah, and it may not be ideal, but my kids and we have a bucket of walnuts and hickory nuts on our front porch. And so my son, every afternoon, he's digging in those walnuts and hickory nuts. We have a big rock in our landscaping in our flower bed out front. My landscaping is very utilitarian. It's definitely not traditional landscaping. And then I have some nutting stones, or like, hammerstone rocks,
Yep.
that we'll put a nut on the rock and hit it with a stone, and it'll crack it open, and then we'll sit there and eat hickory nuts and walnuts. And my kids, that's probably one of their favorite things to do. And so, I don't know how much of a difference that's making sustainability wise, but I don't know. To me, it feels like something we're supposed to be doing. I don't know.
Right. I mean, it reminds me a lot of, the namesake of our foundation, E.O. Wilson, and one of his, most quoted or most utilized concepts of this idea of biophilia, that humans have this innate connection with nature, with other life forms, and that connection, or that love, right, for nature, going out and experiencing cracking a nut on a rock, or smelling what a plant smells like if you crack the stem open, all of those things that you're doing and you're interacting with nature. I think there's a deeper connection there than I think we fully realize. But I think he really tried to share that concept with a lot of folks, and I think a lot of people have identified with it. I think, you look at,
Yeah.
not to get too much off on a tangent, but I think the kind of the extension of experience and of young people experiencing the natural world and how they interact with it has a lot of benefits that I don't think we totally understand. And there's not always an easy line to be drawn, but those types of things I think are so important for us to understand what our real world is and why those things are important and what they can be used for, not just by us, but also all the species that rely on them as well. I know obviously, oaks specifically in the East are such an important, tree for countless insects, countless other species, that it's really vital that we maintain those ecosystems, or we maintain them in a way that has value, not only for us, but also for the species that we share this.
Yeah, and that may sound weird to some people, but pecans are hickories. That's a hickory tree, a pecan, and
I don't think I knew that.
it's not weird for us to eat pecans. Like, that's a food source. You can go to the grocery store and find pecans. I don't think it's as far fetched of an idea as people think, but to me, it's just more so about sustainability. No land had to change, into an agricultural use for me to feed myself. To me, it just makes sense. Like, growing up, we ate a lot of deer meat. We still eat a lot of deer meat. Like, to me, far more sustainable than hundreds of acres being converted to cattle pasture,
Right.
being sprayed with Grazon to convert it to mostly grasses that are non-native, no native forbs out there. Now that's not the case all the time. I just visited a example, and that was a nature conservancy property in Nebraska
Mm.
where I got to meet the guy that the prairie ecologist, that's his name on Instagram. He hand collected over 200 species of wildflowers and native grass seeds, took them out to this old cornfield, planted them by hand. Now that it's now a cattle pasture that gets grazed and cut for hay. And I think he's recorded 202 of those species out there of the 212 or whatever that he planted. And that's going to become more and more important, I think, as time goes on, because we're
Yeah.
losing so much biodiversity. We're going to have to figure out how to incorporate more biodiversity into our land uses.
Absolutely. And I think that really speaks to, a big part of what we do with the Half Earth Project, where we see every species having value.
Mhm.
We try to basically, through the Half Earth Project map, it's this open digital map. We're trying to digitally map every species known to science, which, is a huge endeavor. We understand that. And it kind of all stems from one of E.O. Wilson's last books, this idea of half Earth, right? We should be setting aside half the land and half the ocean for biodiversity, because not only so that biodiversity survives and all the species survive, but also that we survive as well, because we depend on all of the ecosystem services or environmental services those areas provide. And a more diverse landscape is better suited to adapt to any kind of variable or any kind of thing you throw at it, whether it be fire or whether it be floods or whether it be an invasive species. And so what we try to do with that map is we compile all this data about where protected areas exist. And then looking at those species and their home ranges, we basically calculate, well, which species need more protection, with a greater emphasis on species that have limited ranges. So like we were talking about the leafy prairie clover that only exists in a few places in Alabama.
It's also, just to be correct, factually, it also is found in a small area in Tennessee and a small area in Illinois, but in Alabama, it's only found on 2 properties.
Right. And so a species like that is only found in a few places, that has a limited home range, we want to protect as much of that habitat as we can, because we know if there's a little bit of a disturbance or if there's a little bit of development in that area, then that species can be gone forever. And so through that, we've identified, basically, we have created a layer that we call the Places for a Half Earth Future layer, where we highlight these locations where conservation activities really can have the most significant impact on species there that really need our stewardship. And so when we think about those types of places, they're often filled with species that have limited ranges that don't exist very many other places. And so that's really how we got thinking about not only Southern Alabama and the connection with E.O. Wilson, because it was a place that he grew up and spent a lot of time, sounds like similar to what your kids do, outside exploring the swamps, exploring the longleaf pine forests of that area. So it was a huge dream of his to have an area, a protected area in that region. And not only was it important to him, but it's also the science from the Half Earth Project map highlights that area and says, look, this is a place of high biodiversity. It's one of the most I think it's maybe the most biodiverse kind of delta river system in North America, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how we got connected. We were able to go down there and take a look at it for ourselves. But to come back a second, really it's where the Alabama and the Tom Bigsby rivers converge. Just north of that, where they converge, it's a super, wet area that's flooded for most of the year. But I wonder if you could talk, maybe, Kyle, a little bit about your experience. I know we were down there a few weeks back, and talk a little bit about, what we found there, what was interesting about it, what was unique, because I had a great time and
Yeah. It
saw
was
some really cool stuff.
very strange environment, just because of the fact it's underwater so much of the year.
And it wasn't underwater when we were there. Obviously, it was
No, it
a
was
dry
dry.
season, so it was
It was
a nice
dry,
time to
but
go.
the ground in a lot of places, it wasn't piled up in leaves, even though there was a ton of mature hardwoods
Oh yeah.
around everywhere. There was very little leaves on the ground compared to most places. It was also kind of weird to see, like, it was such a biodiverse property, but also, like, I don't think we saw a single, like, box turtle the whole time we were there. And usually when I walk a property in like North Alabama, there's like box turtles everywhere, but like that's a species that can't withstand fire because during the burn season, box turtles only come out when it's like raining.
Okay.
Otherwise, like during droughts and stuff, they're under the ground. So when it's the right time of conditions for a burn to happen, those box turtles aren't affected because they're underground in that cool
I see.
soil. But that that could have been one of the reasons why we didn't see any because it was dry when we were down there. But also, like most of the time, even if I'm walking around in the woods in Alabama, I'm going to see some box turtle shells or box turtles, and I don't think we saw any of that while we were there. But that's because it's 10 foot of water or however, like
Even more, yeah.
yeah, like super flooded certain parts of the year. So like it was weird seeing an environment like that to where in North Alabama, I'd associate that with bunch of different species. Like you have like overcup oak and water oak and willow oak.
Hmm.
And there's Nuttall oak down there, but we have overcup and willow oak and water oak and swamp chestnut oak on Wheeler Wildlife Refuge up here. And it was, but you see something, it's like totally different down there. You got the same mature trees, but the understory is different in a lot of ways. And so that was really interesting. We got to see a lot of aquatic milkweed.
Oh
There's
yeah, that
that,
was a favorite of mine. I kept repeating you probably got tired of me saying it, but I don't know how many monarchs
yeah.
butterflies I saw when we were there.
Yeah, and
It's
so
incredible.
you know, that's a in the prairie, it's a different species of milkweeds. In
Hmm.
floodplains, you're dealing with other species of milkweeds, which is kind of cool to see. And then you have, there's lizard's tail everywhere, and that sumpweed was everywhere, and just
Uh-huh.
it was really cool to see those that river floodplain ecosystem. And
Uh-huh.
that goes all the way up to the Black Belt. So that was kind of neat because you got palmettos, uh, and
Yeah,
you could
a
follow
lot of
that.
palmettos in there.
Yeah, you could follow that ecosystem up to Tom Bigby. And so that was kind of neat because driving into the property, I was like, it feels like I've been here before when I've been to the Black Belt, but only certain areas of the Black Belt when I'm down near the river. So, anyways, that was just some observations I made. But
By the time this comes out, actually, one of the other folks from TNC Alabama, Rob, is actually going to go into the preserve and measure some of these trees officially to
yeah,
see kind of if they're state champions. Because there was the one bald cypress, which I'm pretty sure is the largest bald cypress in the state of Alabama, and that sits on the preserve.
yeah, I'm thinking it's the biggest tree by score on the whole
Yeah,
champion tree list in Alabama. So by like a lot too. So
yeah,
anyways, you can go online and look up Alabama champion trees and look at the sizes, but look at the size of the cypress compared to all the other trees on the list. It's pretty impressive. But that was, that's going to be interesting to see if those trees are some of the champion trees for the state. I'd imagine that property, even the button bush out there was,
oh my gosh, the
I mean,
button bush was, how tall was it?
that's
10
one
feet,
that,
at least 12
yeah,
feet,
some of
15?
them were like at least 12 to 20 inches in diameter. Huge, huge button bush. And that's one that I think of, the ones growing down at my pond are like way smaller than my wrist, way smaller than my wrist at the biggest. And so that was kind of cool to see how big trees get down there. So I'm guessing there's a ton of nutrients being deposited there when it floods. So that may
Yeah,
have something to
those
do with
two
it.
rivers converging and that area really, not really able to be developed because of how much it's flooded every year. It's really a prime candidate for an area to be managed for not only the tree biodiversity, the botany there, but also the aquatic biodiversity. And I think, we saw a couple of really big alligators when we were down there.
Yeah.
And I know there's paddlefish, which are a crazy looking fish if people haven't seen one of those before. Well, we saw a bunch of ducks and wood ducks and spoonbills. Yep, yep. And so we also lost the drone for a while. So glad we found it. It felt super special for me, someone who, read one of E.O. Wilson's books that really kind of inspired me to work in conservation. It was super powerful for me to be able to go to the preserve that's named after him and to experience much of this place that really was his dream. And we talked a lot about that when we were there. And so I'm super thankful and appreciative that TNC Alabama has been a partner in this, as well as you, Kyle, coming down and shooting some content and seeing it for yourself. And I think, what's really cool is if people want to learn a little bit more about what's there, what kind of species they can find, they can actually go to the Half Earth Project map, and we'll actually include a link to the preserve in this story. So you can actually go and look at the map and see what vertebrate species you'd expect to find there, and which of those species really maybe need a little bit more protection, a little bit more stewardship. And so that hopefully in years to come, if there are, more endeavors and interest to preserve some of these areas that are super important for biodiversity so that we don't lose these species that don't exist anywhere else, that can happen. If people want to learn more about you and the Native Habitat Project, where can they go?
Yeah, anywhere on social media, Native Habitat Project. We're on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. We gotta get people out there more, or if we can't do that, meet them where they're at, which is unfortunately on their cell phones these days. But
Right.
if we can get more people to get out and experience these places because they saw something on their phone showing off some unique stuff in the state they live in, I think that's a plus. So, but man, appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kyle. Again, Kyle Lybarger with the Native Habitat Project. Appreciate you joining us today. And for more information on the Native Habitat Project, there'll be links in the story. And as he said, you can always search Native Habitat Project in the social media. It'll be easy to find.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much.